When Ivanka Trump suddenly disrespected Representative Jasmine Crockett, no one knew what was about to happen. 6 seconds of silence stretched into eternity. A single sentence transforming a routine hearing into a subtle masterclass in power. The room didn't feel tense at first, yet it was one of those Capitol Hill hearing rooms with that harsh, clinical lighting. Rows of 2 modest chairs made it easy to forget the weight of the space mid-morning. Not too many cameras lurking. Just a handful of journalists, a few staffers with notebooks, and a C-SPAN feed quietly flickering in the background. This was meant to be an ordinary day. Another economic equity hearing, the kind that usually drifts under the radar, featuring business leaders, academic economists, and policy experts. But one name on the roster shifted the atmosphere instantly. Ivanka Trump. She hadn't appeared on the Hill in over a year. No title, no official role. Yet she carried that familiar blend of polished charm and subtle steel, the kind that drew every eye. Introduced not as a former presidential advisor, but as a private sector leader. Across the table, Representative Jasmine Crockett from Dallas, hair pulled back, navy blazer, red lapel pin. Not flashy, not loud. She was sharp, focused, ready to work on workforce development and how minority-owned businesses are sidelined in government contracts. She had prepared meticulously. Every line of testimony read, every SBA page scanned, every city's data memorized. Her highlighter tucked in her binder, post-its marking each question. When called, she wasted no time. Her voice calm yet firm as she questioned grant dispersal rates in rural counties. Why fewer than 8% of recipients in a recent infrastructure bill were people of color? She scrutinized contractors in Kansas and Mississippi, denied capital despite meeting federal requirements. Some panelists nodded politely, others didn't, but one person remained unmoved. Ivanka, seated at the end, adjusted her microphone, smiled faintly after Jasmine's line of questioning. A pause. Ivanka leaned forward, her tone light, but unmistakably condescending. "I think we all appreciate passion in this space," she began. "Though frankly, real wealth creation usually comes from a different kind of resume, corporate experience, deal-making." That smile, almost dismissive, carried the jab. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't need it to land. Head subtly turned toward Jasmine. A staffer near the back lowered his pen. The hearing hadn't been tense. Now it had a pulse. No one interrupted. No laughter, just a heavy, fleeting silence. Because someone was about to respond. Jasmine blinked, glanced at her binder, then back at Ivanka, still silent. 6 seconds, but in those 6 seconds, the room seemed to stretch. She didn't fidget, didn't scowl. She simply waited. The air thinned, palpable. Then her voice, measured and even, broke it. "It's funny," she said, "because that resume taught me how to fight for people who were never invited into rooms like this. And now, I'm not just in the room. I'm leading it. No theatrics, no raised volume, just clarity, as if she'd been waiting for someone to say it. Perhaps not from Ivanka, but someone, and she had been ready. Yet this was not the climax. Just the spark. A swallow echoed somewhere in the room. That's how quiet it was after her words. A tiny pause, half a second maybe, where no one moved, just stillness. Something landed harder than expected. Ivanka didn't flinch immediately. She pressed her lips together, eyes on her papers, searching for the next note. The smirk that had lingered all morning vanished. The moderator thanked Crockett and moved on. But attention had shifted. No one listened to the next speaker, not the panelist discussing small business lending metrics. All eyes and thoughts remained on what had just occurred. Not loud, but precise, controlled, surgical. Representative Lisa Wexler, a conservative from Utah, leaned to whisper to her aide, who blinked and made a note. Across the room, a younger congressman mouthed "damn," without realizing it. That was the moment it clicked. This would not be just another hearing. What made Ivanka's comment sting? Wasn't the words themselves, but their delivery. Smooth, smiling, like an afterthought. Like stating the obvious, which cut deeper. It wasn't attack. It was dismissal. Jasmine had heard it before. Years ago, during her first run, told she didn't look the part. When applying for a law clerkship, a judge said her resume showed community spirit, but lacked strategic depth. Before that, in college tutoring to cover rent, a parent once asked if she was the assistant instead of the tutor. So when Ivanka said what she said, Jasmine didn't hear anything new. She heard something old, dressed up in fresh words, and that's what made her pause. She didn't snap, didn't take it personally. She let it sit, let it breathe. Then she struck back with something stronger than sarcasm. Reality, back in the room. Ivanka tried to recalibrate when it was her turn, keeping it general. She mentioned her work with the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative, tossed out a few numbers about women entrepreneurs in Latin America, a half-hearted nod to grassroots energy. But the energy in the room had already shifted. Crockett didn't just respond. She reset the tone, and the staffers noticed. The aides behind the dais noticed. People watching online had clipped the moment and sent it around. That's the thing about congressional hearings. Most are dull, background noise. But every so often, a real moment emerges, unscripted, honest, and instantly felt. Outside the chamber, in a hallway usually reserved for staff huddles and coffee runs, a young black woman named Rochelle, interning for a representative from Oregon, stared at her phone. She'd watched the clip 3 times. She didn't just say it. She whispered, grinning. "Who?" her friend asked. "Crockett?" "Yep." 6 seconds of silence. And then boom. "I'm leading it." She turned her phone so her friend could watch. Right then, in real time, that little hallway became the first of 100 places passing the clip like candy. Inside the hearing room, Jasmine remained unfazed, flipping through her binder, jotting notes for the next question. Her composure wasn't new. It was built over years of being underestimated, overlooked, talked down to, and still showing up. Ivanka sat straighter, her next answer more polished, but the glow had dulled. The balance in the room had shifted. And she knew it. You don't really recover from being publicly corrected with that much grace, especially when you started it. But Crockett's moment didn't stop at the room's walls. It had entered the world. Outside, the city rolled on. Ubers honked. Hill interns gripped iced coffees like lifelines. Inside, the chamber's air hadn't settled. You could feel it. Something unspoken threading through the rows, hanging over committee members pretending to check notes or glance at phones. People avoided eye contact with Jasmine, not out of discomfort, but not wanting to appear too eager to choose sides. That's how Washington works. Appear neutral until the wind shifts, then lean. But not everyone could stay calm. Representative Wendell Bryce from Ohio, a man known for centrist views and an aversion to conflict, kept glancing at Jasmine, then at Ivanka, as if waiting for the universe to give him a sign. Maybe it would. Maybe public sentiment was already blowing, and he was late to feel it. A few seats behind, Simone Hendricks, veteran journalist for The Hill, reached for her phone and texted her editor. No punctuation, no emojis, just 4 words. Crockett shut her down. Within 2 minutes, the clip was up on X. Raw video, no caption. Someone in the control room sensed it too. This wasn't just a moment. This was a character-defining clip. Jasmine stayed composed, jotting something on a sticky note. Probably a reference for a bill she'd mention later. But she knew what had happened. Not smugly, not in a gotcha way. Something quieter. A small win that didn't need announcing. And yet, across social media, the moment spread like water. Quiet, unstoppable. A Brooklyn activist reposted the clip. This is what grace under fire looks like. A DC-based black law student wrote, "You could teach a course on carrying yourself with power. First A, use this clip, Even a conservative commentator, not known for praise, tweeted ice-cold respect. While online lit up, inside the chamber, faces wore the polite mask of professionalism. No one clapped, no one smiled too long, but the silence carried pressure. Not emptiness, but weight. Ivanka stayed seated, posture stiffened, eyes flicked to her notepad, but she didn't write. She avoided eye contact with Jasmine. Now, not yet, maybe later, in a hallway unseen by cameras. For a while, the hearing tried to continue. Another panelist, a middle-aged business professor from the University of Oregon, offered data points on long-term capital access. His voice steady, but he paused twice, glancing toward Jasmine, wary of being out of step. That's what happens when someone shifts the gravity in the room. Jasmine didn't gloat, didn't lean back or smile at the audience. She remained straight-backed, collected, the same posture she had walked in with, prepared for this moment. She just hadn't known which face it would wear. And as more people pulled out their phones under the table, pretending to take notes while refreshing feeds, the numbers began to roll in. Hundreds of reposts, dozens of quotes. The hashtags, hashtag 6-second silence, hashtag Crockett clapback, started climbing. Even Jasmine's own communications director, sitting near the back, couldn't help but smirk. She didn't post anything. Not yet. But she knew by heart how these things snowball. The thing is, Crockett wasn't aiming for viral. She wasn't performing. She was responding. Her words weren't crafted for applause. They were forged from years of building armor, knowing exactly when to lift it off. And that's what made them powerful. People had seen rehearsed outrage before, grandstanding. But they hadn't seen this. Grace with an edge, sharp enough to slice through a room full of suits and ties. Where there's heat, there's movement. Eyes beyond the chamber were watching. What would happen next? By early afternoon, the clip had escaped Capitol Hill, spreading like spilled ink. Local reporters called it the 6-second silence. Commentators left and right couldn't resist weighing in. But what made it different was who shared it. Not just journalists or political junkies. The hairstylist in Little Rock posting between clients. The teacher in Oakland looping it during lunch. The Lyft driver in Tallahassee, hitting play twice, then pulling over to send it to his sister. No flashy editing, no dramatic music. Just Jasmine Crockett, measured, unbothered, calmly reclaiming the room. I'm not just in the room. I'm leading it. That one line started showing up in Instagram captions, TikTok videos, Twitter bios. Quoted in group chats, turned into memes. Others wrote think pieces in notes apps, pasting them into threads. Even accounts that rarely touched politics. Fashion bloggers, food bloggers, a yoga instructor in Spokane. Everyone shared it. Why? Because it wasn't politics. It was power and restraint. Confidence that doesn't need to shout to be heard. On MSNBC, a panel replayed the exchange in slow motion. Host Lisa McFadden turned to her guests. When's the last time you saw someone make a statement? That clean, that fast, that elegant? They paused. A historian leaned in. What she did was create a moment that reminds people why character matters in politics. It wasn't a clapback. It was a masterclass. Back in Dallas, Crockett's team scrambled, not to spin, but to keep up. Her inbox overflowed. Her personal assistant had to silence notifications. The phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Even her mom called. I saw your little moment on TV. You were calm, baby, calm. Like a storm. Jasmine didn't respond right away. She smiled, returned to reading hearing transcripts. She had more to say. And her next round of questions was coming. Behind her, her staff felt the shift. That quiet storm of momentum, building into something they hadn't planned, didn't need to. The moment had a life of its own. On the Hill, the aftermath was louder in hallways than inside the hearing room. Two Democratic aides ran into a Republican staffer in the elevator. No words, just a raised eyebrow, a small nod to a phone screen muttered. "Y'all saw that, right?" "Yep." "You think she meant it that way?" "Oh, she knew exactly what she was doing." Meanwhile, in cubicles deep in the Department of Commerce, young analysts replayed the moment, then sat in silence for a few seconds, mimicking Jasmine's pause. One finally broke the silence. 6 seconds. That's all it took. But it wasn't just the moment. It was what it represented. To some, validation. To others, a challenge. The question wasn't what Jasmine Crockett said. It was why it hit so hard. The answer, presence. That rare ability to make someone sit up without raising your voice, correct without belittling, to win without crushing. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect. The country was already buzzing. Debates about authenticity, who gets to lead, who understands working people's lives. Crockett's silence and reply answered both in under 10 seconds. Not just a response to Ivanka Trump, but to every dismissive glance, backhanded comment, job interview where someone assumed too little, every boardroom where a woman had to prove twice as much for half the respect. And viewers? They felt it. Teen girls quoted it on TikTok. Law students wrote essays. Older viewers, especially black women, passed it around like family heirlooms. Jasmine didn't change tone, didn't take a victory lap. She stayed at the hearing, kept doing her job. For her, that moment wasn't performance. It was practice. She'd been holding those 6 seconds for years, saving them for the right room, the right remark, the right target. And when the time came, she used them like a scalpel. Crockett's rise wasn't built on one moment. It was 100 others nobody had seen. And now, they were about to come to light. Long before marble halls and congressional microphones, Jasmine Crockett spent most days in county courtrooms, low ceilings, stained carpets, and clocks that always ran 5 minutes slow. That was her first arena. She hadn't grown up imagining politics. Her world was shaped by watching neighbors get evicted, left with nowhere to go, by seeing her aunt fight for disability benefits, by reading legal notices tacked to South Dallas front doors like eviction was just another Tuesday. She didn't grow up around suits or donors. She grew up around obstacles, people clawing their way over them with whatever strength they had left. When she got to law school, it wasn't a dream of power that pushed her. It was frustration. She'd seen what happened when people couldn't afford decent lawyers. She became one. Public defense. An office smaller than most kitchens. 6, 7 cases a day. Walking into court already knowing most clients weren't going to win. Not because they were guilty, but because the odds were stacked. The system didn't bend easily for people without clean records, without second chances. There was one morning she never forgot. Early summer heat creeping up the building. By 9 a.m., her client, 19 years old, a dime bag of weed, a busted taillight. No priors, no weapon. Just bad timing, bad luck. The prosecutor wanted jail time. Jasmine pushed back. Flat shoes, loose ponytail, folders under her arm. She made her case. Not a speech, not tears. Just the truth. This kid didn't need punishment. He needed a job. Stability. Options. The judge listened. For once, ruled in their favor. The kid stared. Whispered. "That's it?" Jasmine nodded. "Yeah, that's it." Moments like that didn't go viral. No cameras. No headlines. But they stacked up. Case after case. Defense after defense. That's how she built her rhythm. Learning to speak when it mattered. Wait when silence could speak louder. During those years, she learned the power of timing. Judges interrupting, prosecutors condescending, bailiffs ignoring her, asking where the real attorney was. She never snapped. She built armor. Every smirk, every eye roll, every doubting glance became bricks. By the time she ran for state representative, people called her too direct, too loud, too bold. She smiled and knocked on doors, block after block, repeating her story, handing out flyers on a shoestring budget, half printed at home. One afternoon, outside a laundromat, a woman asked, "What makes you think you can fix any of this?" Jasmine didn't flinch, looked her in the eye. "I don't think I can fix it all, but I can fight like hell trying." The woman took a flyer, told 3 others waiting for dryers. That's how it started. Now in Washington, Jasmine brought the same focus she had in courtrooms. Different room, same fight. That's why she was calm during the hearing. Years of listening to people question her credentials. A microphone, a smirk from Ivanka Trump, didn't shake her. She'd already been sharpened. And that 6-second pause? Not for show. Instinct. The instinct she'd built waiting for judges to finish notes, cops to stop interrupting cross-exams, juries to look her client in the eye. That moment in the hearing wasn't a performance. It was culmination. People online called her the voice of now, but Jasmine knew she wasn't a moment. She was the product of years of moments stacking, building, waiting. That's why she didn't celebrate. She turned the page in her binder and moved on to the next point. While she stayed focused, others, especially Ivanka, started feeling heat creeping closer. They'd walked into the same room that morning, but not from the same world. Ivanka Trump grew up in a penthouse with gold-plated faucets, private security. Her childhood wasn't quiet. It was curated. Elite prep schools, boardrooms, before most people ever paid rent. Media painted her polished, sophisticated, poised. And she was, on paper, her world measured in quarterly earnings, inheritance strategies, branding deals. She spoke the language of scale, leverage. When she entered a hearing, she didn't just bring notes. She brought an image, always camera-ready. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, carried grit. Communities where power looked different. Less shine, more fight. Networking wasn't sipping wine at galas. It was midnight calls to community leaders, driving herself to town halls, staying late answering questions. One-on-one. Where Ivanka had access, Jasmine had experience. The contrast wasn't just background. It was rhythm. Jasmine answered with context, specificity. Ivanka spoke in polished broad strokes, sometimes circling points without landing them. Her voice soft, controlled, but next to Jasmine's grounded clarity, it felt rehearsed, like a pitch in a room that needed real answers. During a break, reporters gathered near the back, small clusters. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. This wasn't going the way anyone expected. A Republican senator's aide leaned against the wall. "I thought Ivanka was supposed to own this thing," another muttered. "Didn't see Crockett coming. Maybe that's the problem." Ivanka underestimated what lived beneath Jasmine's calm. She assumed her polished resume would speak for itself. Daughter of a presidential advisor, businesswoman, Ivanka Trump would naturally outshine someone who'd spent years in public defense. But she forgot one critical thing. Experience like Jasmine's can't be bought. It's forged in tension. In rooms where no one claps when you speak, where your voice has to cut through interruptions and sideways glances, where your intelligence isn't assumed, it must be proven again and again. Ivanka had grown up in spaces where being present was often enough. Jasmine grew up in spaces where being exceptional still might not be, and the hearing made that visible. Every question Jasmine asked was targeted, informed, rooted in lived struggle. She didn't quote theories. She quoted stories. The names of contractors in Jackson who hadn't received federal funding. A woman in Tulsa who lost her storefront after a delayed grant. These weren't numbers on a page. They were lives she had touched, faces she remembered. Ivanka, meanwhile, spoke in general trends, encouraging indicators, long-term growth. Her words weren't wrong. They just weren't real enough. The public noticed. One comment read, "Ivanka's talking about policy like it's a Pinterest board. Jasmine's talking like she's been carrying people through the cracks." Another post went viral, side-by-side screenshots from the hearing. Caption, "Polished doesn't mean prepared." Inside the chamber, the mood shifted. More questions started coming Jasmine's way. One member even bypassed the panel to ask her opinion on a bill amendment. That rarely happened. Ivanka watched quietly, trying to smile, adjusting her cuff, but it didn't hide the truth. This was Jasmine's room. Not claimed. Earned. And that unsettled people. Not that Jasmine had challenged Ivanka, but that she had done it without anger, without raising her voice, with composure that comes from knowing who you are, and knowing what it took to get there. That truth echoed louder than any title. But Jasmine wasn't done. Something else was about to happen, drawing even more eyes. By the second round of questioning, something had cracked open. You could feel it, not in the words, but in how they were said. Lawmakers who glanced at their watches now leaned forward. Committee members who were disengaged started scribbling, tilting microphones toward her. Even across the aisle, attention had shifted. Representative Gordon Haskell, a moderate from Ohio, looked over. "Congresswoman Crocker, do you mind if I get your take on this?" He was supposed to direct his question to a panelist. He didn't. There was a pause. Jasmine lifted her pen, uncapped it, began to answer. Not with slogans but specifics. Community banking access. The difference between loan eligibility and loan approval. Recent Cincinnati data. Testimony from 2 years prior on the same legislation. That's when people really started listening. Her words weren't flashy, but they had weight. The weight of actually doing the work, not just reading headlines. More heads turned as she spoke. Ivanka glanced sideways, crossed her legs, flipped a page, looked ahead. Her silence was louder now. Posture straighter. Movements calculated. She wasn't reacting. She was recalculating. She saw it too. Jasmine wasn't just winning the room. She was changing it. Representative Leanne Moretti, neutral all morning, whispered to her aide, then turned to her mic. "I'd also like to echo what Congresswoman Crocker mentioned earlier. We've got to be looking at access and timing for these grants." In under 2 hours, Jasmine went from one of several committee voices to the anchor in the room. No dramatics, no raised fists. Just intelligence paired with clarity, and the kind of earned authority rarely seen amid pre-written speeches. In the hallway, reporters gathered. The clip of the 6-second silence had hit 1 million views. A CNN producer was already prepping a moment of the week segment. Commentators coast to coast requested comment. Jasmine's comms team was swamped. Inside, the conversation reflected what was happening outside. Representative Rhonda Beck, who rarely addressed new members, leaned into her mic. "Congresswoman Crocker, could you expand on how state-level inequities are affecting SBA rollout nationwide?" Veteran asking a freshman to explain national policy. It didn't happen often. Jasmine didn't flinch. She nodded slightly, layering her answer with stats and lived experience. Community Development Block Grant Program back in Texas. Gaps between intention and implementation. She never made it about herself. She made it matter. The hearing chair adjusted her tone too. Less formal, less rigid, as if recognizing the conversation had grown real. The mood wasn't confrontational. It was attentive. No shouting, no gavel slams. Just the quiet sound of respect building around someone who hadn't come to perform. But she had managed to command the room anyway. Jasmine caught a glance from her legislative aide in the corner. A subtle nod. Not of pride, but confirmation. "You're shifting them. Keep going." And so she did. When the final question of the segment came, it was directed at the entire panel. But Jasmine answered first. Her voice didn't waver. Her tone didn't rise. She gave a clear, thoughtful summary, tying the discussion together and recentering the issue on real people. People who didn't care about credentials or titles, only access, stability, and fairness. By the time she finished, even some skeptics leaned back quiet. Not because they agreed with her politics, but because they had seen something rare. Outside that chamber, other voices were waiting. Some of them were about to change everything. The hearing ended the way most do. A few half-hearted claps, the rustle of papers, quiet shuffling toward the doors. But not everyone left. Jasmine lingered, answering a question from a local reporter about infrastructure spending in Black communities. Her answers were thoughtful, precise, but her eyes kept flicking to the hallway. Because that's where the real conversations happened. In those few feet between the committee room and the elevator. Deals floated. Support was gauged. Truth whispered that no one would ever say into a mic. As she stepped into the corridor, her phone buzzed. A DM from someone she hadn't expected. A staffer for Representative Dale Langston. A Republican from Arizona, known for rarely crossing party lines. That was one of the cleanest takedowns I've ever seen. Don't let up. If you want to talk numbers, I've got data you'll care about. Jasmine smiled. Not big, just enough. Minutes later, as she made her way toward the elevator, someone called out, "Congresswoman Crocker?" She turned. It was Senator Brian Addington, white, late 60s, Southern accent as thick as July humidity, known for economic conservatism and not for praising freshman Democrats. He reached out, shook her hand firmly. "You handled yourself well in there. Graceful, direct. Reminded me of my old debate coach." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Your debate coach?" Addington chuckled. "She called out billionaires. You called out anyone trying to make something sound smarter than it actually was." He didn't stay long. Just nodded and walked away. Jasmine didn't trust it yet, but she noted it for later. As she passed through the lobby toward the exit, a young Black woman, early 20s, Hill intern badge, stopped her breathless. "I just wanted to say thank you." That silence, that reply. I've never seen anyone do that and still be that calm. Everyone talks about showing up, but you own that space. Jasmine touched the intern's shoulder lightly. It's not about owning it. It's about not giving it away. That phrase would be on t-shirts by the end of the week. But in that moment, it was just something she said, muscle memory. Back in her office, the emails kept pouring in. Not all public, not all praise. Some were from quiet allies. People who couldn't say it out loud yet, but who felt something shift when they watched the clip. One came from a Black attorney at the Treasury. "Watching you reminded me why I stayed in this job. Sometimes someone breaks through the noise and says something we didn't realize we've been waiting to hear." Another from a small business owner in Tulsa. "You said it like you meant it. My daughter watched that clip 5 times. She's 14 and already asking how to run for office." Jasmine read each one, some twice. But what stuck most was a message from her former law school professor. Subject line, "Proud of you." Inside, "I remember how they doubted you in moot court. Said you were too intense, too personal. You've made every single one of them eat those words." It wasn't the validation she needed, but it was the kind she remembered. That night, she sat in her apartment, still in the navy blazer from the hearing, legs tucked under her on the couch, city noise filtering in. But her mind was still in that room, feeling that pause. Those 6 seconds, she thought about how many times she'd held her tongue, waiting for the right moment, the right audience, the right angle. And how this time she hadn't. She'd spoken clear, calm, unapologetic. Now others were following the echo. But as much as the moment opened doors, it was what came next that would truly define her legacy. By the next morning, the clip had passed 5 million views, translated into Spanish, and shared on Lading's civic pages. A French political blog wrote, "Le silence stratégique de Jasmine Crockett." A Korean-American advocacy group reposted it with subtitles, "Dignity doesn't whisper. It waits, then speaks." Yet Jasmine hadn't spoken to the press since the hearing. Not once. No cable news hits, no morning shows, no podcasts. She stayed quiet, letting the moment breathe, letting others talk about it. Because Jasmine had never chased attention. Her power came from letting it come to her. That didn't stop the headlines from multiplying. Jasmine Crockett's pause heard around the hill. When silence becomes strength. Crockett's 6-second lesson on class and clarity. Even some conservative outlets, usually eager to discredit her, took a measured tone. They didn't praise her politics, but they couldn't deny her poise. In Washington, that was rare. That afternoon, she met with her interns. The group, mostly young, mostly women, mostly first-time Hill workers, sat in the conference room, unsure whether to bring it up. But Jasmine beat them to it. Dropping her phone on the table, she said, "Y'all seen the clip?" Nervous laughter. "Yes, ma'am. Only 1,000 times." One of them said, blushing. She smiled. "It's just one moment, but sometimes one moment says more than a dozen speeches." One intern asked, "Did you plan it like that?" Jasmine shook her head. "I didn't plan to be disrespected, but I did plan how I'd handle it." She paused, letting that sink in. You don't always need to yell. You don't have to snap, or throw something or storm out. Sometimes all you need is stillness. Let them hear their own echo, then answer it with truth. Another intern leaned forward. "Can I ask something? What if someone like her makes you feel small, and you don't have the right words?" Jasmine looked at her for a moment. "You don't need perfect words, just honest ones. And sometimes, silence is a sentence all by itself." That sentence would later make its way to Tumblr quotes, Twitter threads, and eventually the back of a tote bag sold at a DC bookstore. But in that room, in that moment, it was fuel. Later that week, she received a handwritten letter from a woman in Flint, Michigan. "My daughter watched that clip and said, 'Mama, she looks like you when you're mad but don't say nothing.' I cried. I just wanted to say thank you for showing her that calm can still be power." Jasmine pinned the letter to her bulletin board, next to old photos of court cases and campaign flyers from her first race. That wall had become a quiet collection of why she kept going. She also got a text from a woman she hadn't heard from in years. Elise, her former college roommate, now a high school counselor in Albuquerque. "Just showed the video to my girls. They all said the same thing. She didn't flinch. So proud of you." That last message hit differently, because there had been days Jasmine had flinched. Days she questioned if she was too blunt, too tired, too different. But not this time. She had stood firm in that chair, in that room, in her voice. Now even the people who had once ignored her speeches were calling to schedule meetings. Colleagues were rereading her policy proposals. Her office received an unexpected invitation to present at a bipartisan summit on equity and government funding. The same people who had skimmed past her name on the docket were now saying, "Let's bring her in for this," all because she paused, all because she waited, and then struck with precision. In politics, most people chase the camera. But sometimes, the most powerful moments are the ones where the camera comes to you. Even with all that attention, Jasmine knew one thing. The real work was just beginning. A few days later, Jasmine Crockett sat alone in her office. The evening sun filtered in through narrow windows, painting long shadows across her desk. Her inbox was full. Her voicemail, too. A CNN producer had emailed 3 times asking for an interview. One of her staffers forwarded a note from Trevor Noah's team. hoping she'd appear for a conversation on leadership in tense political spaces. She hadn't replied to any of them. Instead, she sat with a notebook open. No screens, no distractions, just paper, pen, and silence. She wasn't thinking about the viral moment, the headlines, or even the clip replayed in classrooms across the country. She was thinking about that pause, the 6 seconds that now seemed to have traveled farther than any speech she had ever given. And she realized something important. Those 6 seconds weren't empty. They were earned. Earned through years of being talked over, doubted, ignored. Through moments when speaking out would have cost her more than staying silent. Through times when silence wasn't a weapon, it was a shield. But now it had become a tool. Not everyone will find themselves in a congressional hearing. Most won't be seated across from someone like Ivanka Trump. But everyone will face a moment when they're challenged subtly, directly, or dismissively. And that's what made the moment matter. It wasn't about politics. It was about poise. Because when someone tries to measure your worth against a resume built from grit instead of privilege, your silence can say, "You don't get to define me." And your voice, that's your proof. A week after the hearing, Jasmine gave a short speech at a community center in East St. Louis. No press, no fanfare, just folding chairs, bottled water, and about 60 people, mostly small business owners, teachers, and retirees. She stood at the front of the room, holding a mic in one hand and a stack of policy printouts in the other. But she didn't talk about the hearing. Not at first. She talked about follow-through, about how to get grants, about who to call when the paperwork got stupid, as one woman in the crowd called it. Then, near the end, someone asked about that hearing. "Were you scared to say it like that?" A man in the third row asked. "Like, what if it backfired?" Jasmine nodded slowly. "Of course. I thought about it. I thought, what if I say this, and they label me difficult again? What if they twist it?" She paused, but then I remembered. I didn't come to Congress to perform. I came to be heard. And if someone takes offense to me standing firm in truth, that says more about them than me. There were no cheers, no claps, just a long moment of eye contact with the people in that room. Because they got it. Afterward, a grandmother came up quietly and said, "You gave my granddaughter language for something she couldn't explain. She saw you and said, 'That's how you stand when they try to shrink you.'" Jasmine smiled because that was the point. Not to go viral, not to get a headline, but to make it easier for someone else to walk into their own room, be it a boardroom, a school, a courtroom, and know they deserve to be there. And if someone questions that, let the silence do the heavy lifting. Not all power comes from speaking. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly when to speak and having something worth saying. That's what Jasmine Crockett showed the world that day. A lesson in control, a reminder that character can cut deeper than credentials, and a quiet declaration that still rings. I'm not just in the room. I'm leading it. So if you took something from this story, share it. Send it to someone who's been quiet too long. The rooms are changing, and the voices in them should too.